I was 17 years old when I discovered that the woman who was supposed to protect me was using the very lighthouse meant to save lives to destroy them. For 3 years I'd been a prisoner in that tower on the Maine coast, believing I was alone in my suffering. But the truth was far darker than I could have imagined, and it would take every ounce of courage I had to step into the light. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. The lighthouse stood like a lone sentinel against the gray Atlantic, its white tower gleaming in the weak morning sun. To anyone passing through our small coastal town in Maine, it must have looked picturesque, even romantic. But to me it was a prison made of stone and salt air, and my jailer was the woman the town knew as the dedicated widow who'd taken over lighthouse duties after my father died. They didn't know Constance Coleman the way I did. I woke that September morning to the sound of her footsteps on the spiral stairs, each measured step a warning. I'd learned to read her moods by the way she walked. Quick and light meant she was in a hurry to meet someone. Slow and heavy meant I was in for a long day of criticism and impossible tasks. This morning, her steps were deliberate, controlled. That was the worst kind. "Sarah!" Her voice cut through the door like a blade. "The tower windows should have been cleaned yesterday. You're getting lazy." I'd cleaned those windows 2 days ago, polishing every pane until they sparkled. But I'd learned not to argue. Arguing only made things worse. "Yes, Mom," I called back, already pulling on my worn jeans and sweater. "I'll do them again right away." The footsteps paused. I held my breath. Then they continued down the stairs and I released the air from my lungs slowly. Another morning survived. My room was small, barely more than a storage closet that Constance had cleared out for me after Father died. She'd kept the master bedroom with its view of the harbor for herself. My single window looked out at the rocky cliffs and the churning sea below. On clear days, I could see the fishing boats heading out at dawn. I'd watch them for hours sometimes, imagining what it would be like to be on one of them, heading anywhere but here. My father had loved this lighthouse. He'd been the keeper for 15 years, and he'd taught me everything about maintaining the beacon, about the sacred duty of keeping the light burning for sailors in the dark. He used to say that lighthouse keepers were guardians of hope, that every ship that made it safely to harbor was a life we'd helped save. Then he married Constance during my 14th year. She was different then, or maybe she was just better at hiding who she really was. She smiled more. She cooked meals that actually tasted good. She even braided my hair sometimes and told me stories about growing up in Boston. Everything changed after the accident. Father's boat was found capsized 3 miles offshore on a calm day. They said he must have hit his head, fallen overboard. Constance cried at the funeral, accepted the condolences of the townspeople, and took over as lighthouse keeper within a week. The Coast Guard had approved her application immediately, impressed by her dedication to continuing her husband's work. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of watching her transform from grieving widow to cold warden. 3 years of isolation, of being told I was too fragile to attend school, too troubled to make friends, too damaged to be trusted in town without supervision. Your mother's death affected you deeply. Constance would tell anyone who asked about me. And losing your father so soon after? Well, the poor girl needs stability and quiet. Too much stimulation isn't good for her. My mother had died when I was 8. I barely remembered her, just impressions of warmth and laughter and the smell of lavender. But Constance used her memory like a weapon, telling everyone I was mentally unstable because of unresolved grief. The truth was simpler and more terrible. Constance wanted me isolated because isolated people have no witnesses. I finished cleaning the tower windows as the sun climbed higher, my arms aching from reaching and scrubbing. Below, I could see the town waking up. Smoke rose from chimneys, cars moved along the coastal road, normal people living normal lives, while I was trapped in this tower like some twisted fairy tale princess. Except there would be no rescue coming. Or so I thought. It was late October when Jack Morrison first spoke to me. I was at the general store, one of my rare supervised trips into town. Constance had sent me to pick up supplies, and she waited in the truck outside, watching through the window like a hawk. I was reaching for a bag of flour when I heard a warm voice behind me. "Sarah Coleman. Lord, I haven't seen you in ages. You've grown up." I turned to find a man in his 50s with weathered skin and kind blue eyes, wearing a fisherman's jacket that smelled of salt and honest work. I recognized him vaguely from before Father died, but Constance had kept me so isolated that I barely remembered anyone from town anymore. "I'm Jack Morrison," he said, seeing my hesitation. "I used to fish with your father sometimes. He was a good man. I was real sorry about what happened." "Thank you," I whispered, glancing nervously toward the window. Constance was watching. Jack's eyes followed my gaze, and something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or concern. How are you doing out there at the lighthouse? Must be lonely for a young person. I'm fine, I said, automatically, the lie I'd been trained to tell. Constance takes good care of me, does she now? Jack said quietly. His eyes lingered on my face, and I realized he was looking at the fading bruise on my cheekbone that I'd tried to cover with makeup. I'd been clumsy washing dishes 2 nights ago, Constance had said, though we both knew the truth. I turned away quickly, grabbing the flower. I need to go. She's waiting, Sarah. Jack's voice was gentle but firm. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, my boat's usually docked at Pier 7, the Emma Grace, named after my daughter. Remember that, okay? Pier 7. I nodded without looking at him and hurried to the counter. My hand shook as I paid. Behind me I heard Jack's footsteps move away, but I felt his concern like a warm blanket I wasn't allowed to wrap around myself. In the truck, Constance was silent for the first mile. Then she spoke, her voice dripping with false sweetness that made my stomach clench. What did that man want? Nothing, he just said he knew Father. Jack Morrison is a gossip and a busybody, Constance said coldly. You're not to speak to him again, do you understand? Yes, ma'am. I protect you from people like that, Sarah. People who would take advantage of a troubled girl. You should be grateful. I stared out the window at the gray ocean and said nothing. But for the first time in 3 years, a tiny seed of something had been planted in my chest. Hope, maybe. Or just the memory of kindness in a stranger's eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled around the lighthouse, rattling the windows I'd cleaned that morning. I lay in my narrow bed, thinking about Jack Morrison and the boat named Emma Grace and the way he'd looked at me like I was a person who mattered. Around midnight, I heard Constance's door open and her footsteps on the stairs. That was unusual. She normally slept soundly, exhausted from her days of maintaining the lighthouse and keeping up her perfect public image. Curiosity pulled me from my bed. I crept to my door and opened it a crack, peering into the darkness. Below, I saw the beam of Constance's flashlight moving toward the tower. I waited until she'd climbed up, then I slipped out of my room and followed, my bare feet silent on the cold stone steps. The tower had windows at each level, and I positioned myself at the one below the lamp room where Constance had gone. The wind was fierce up here, and through the glass I could see dark clouds racing across the moon. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Far out on the water, maybe 2 miles offshore, I saw lights. Not the running lights of a normal boat, but a pattern of flashes. 3 long, 2 short, 3 long again, a signal. And from above me, in the lamp room, I saw our lighthouse beacon. The powerful light that was supposed to guide ships safely to harbor go dark. Completely dark. My heart hammered in my chest. Lighthouses didn't just go dark. Not unless something was terribly wrong with the equipment, or unless someone deliberately turned them off. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing, as the darkness stretched on. 5 minutes. 10. The signal lights flashed again from the boat, and I heard Constance moving above me. Then, suddenly, our beacon blazed to life again, sweeping its familiar arc across the black water. But something had changed. The boat's lights were moving now, coming closer to shore, heading toward the rocky cove on the north side of our point, the side hidden from the town, accessible only by a treacherous path down the cliffs. I stayed frozen at the window for another hour, watching, until I heard Constance's footsteps coming back down. I ran as quietly as I could, slipping back into my room just as her flashlight beam swept across the landing. Safe in my bed, I lay awake until dawn, my mind racing. What had I just witnessed? Why would Constance darken the lighthouse beacon? What was on that boat, and where was it going? The questions tumbled over each other, but underneath them all was a growing certainty that made my hands shake beneath the covers. My stepmother was involved in something dangerous, something illegal. And whatever it was, she was using my father's beloved lighthouse, the beacon meant to save lives, to do it. For the next week I watched Constance with new eyes. I noticed things I'd been too beaten down to see before. The way she kept her office, the small room off the lamp room where Father used to keep maintenance records, locked at all times. The way she'd disappear some nights, telling me she was checking the equipment, but staying gone for hours. The way certain mornings she'd be tired and irritable, as if she'd been up all night. And I noticed the money. Lighthouse keepers didn't make much. Father had always said we lived simply but comfortably. Yet Constance had new things constantly. A new truck, expensive clothes she wore on her monthly trips to Portland, a locked safe in her bedroom that hadn't been there when Father was alive. I started keeping my own log, writing down everything I observed in a small notebook I hid behind a loose stone in my bedroom wall, the dates when the beacon went dark at night, the pattern of boat signals I'd seen. The mornings Constance seemed particularly on edge. But I needed proof, real proof. And that meant getting into her locked office. The opportunity came on a cold November afternoon when Constance announced she had to drive to Rockland for supplies. She'd be gone for hours, she said, and I was to stay in the lighthouse and continue my chores. She locked her bedroom door and her office door, as always, and drove away in her truck. I waited 30 minutes to be sure she wasn't coming back. Then I went to work. Father had taught me about the lighthouse's construction, including the fact that the office had originally been designed with a ventilation shaft that connected to the lamp room above. It was sealed now, covered by a metal grate, but I knew where it was. I climbed to the lamp room with a screwdriver I'd taken from the maintenance kit. My hands shook as I worked, unscrewing the grate that covered the ventilation shaft. The opening was narrow, too narrow for an adult, but I was thin from years of Constance's meager meals. I squeezed through the opening, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The shaft was dark and musty, filled with cobwebs that caught in my hair. I crawled down carefully, feeling my way until I reached another grate. Through it I could see Constance's office below. This grate was easier to remove from inside the shaft. I pushed it aside and lowered myself down, dropping the last few feet onto the office floor with a soft thud. I was in. The office was neat and organized, everything in its place. File cabinets lined one wall. A desk sat beneath the window overlooking the sea. And there, on a shelf above the desk, was a series of leather-bound logbooks. I pulled one down, my hands trembling. It was dated from the current year. I opened it and started reading. At first, it looked like a normal lighthouse keeper's log. Weather conditions, equipment maintenance, fuel levels for the backup generator. But then I noticed something odd. Certain entries were marked with a small symbol in the margin, a tiny anchor drawn in red ink. I flipped through the pages, finding more anchor symbols. They appeared every few weeks, always on nights when the weather was mentioned as clear, or light fog. I grabbed an older logbook from last year and found the same pattern. Then I found the second set of books. They were hidden in a locked drawer in the desk, but Father had taught me how to pick simple locks using a bent paperclip. My hands were sweating as I worked the lock, glancing constantly at the door, terrified Constance would return early. The lock clicked open. Inside were 3 notebooks, smaller than the official logs. I pulled one out and opened it to a random page, and my breath caught in my throat. These weren't maintenance logs. They were coded records of smuggling operations. The entries were abbreviated and used initials instead of names, but the pattern was clear. Dates, times, coordinates, cargo descriptions, and payment amounts. I saw references to cigarettes, pharmaceuticals, and luxury goods, all items that would avoid customs and taxes if brought in illegally. My father's lighthouse, the beacon he'd tended with such pride and dedication, was being used to guide smugglers to safe landing spots along our rocky coast. I started photographing pages with the old digital camera I'd found months ago in a storage box. It had belonged to my mother, and I'd hidden it, knowing Constance would confiscate it if she found it. Now I worked quickly, snapping picture after picture, my hands shaking so badly I had to brace the camera against the desk. That's when I found the entry that made my world tilt on its axis. It was from 3 years ago, dated 2 weeks before my father's death. The entry read, RC getting suspicious, asking too many questions about night ops, problem needs resolution before Coast Guard inspection. RC Robert Coleman, my father. I sank into the desk chair, the camera falling from my numb fingers. My father hadn't died in an accident. He'd discovered what Constance was doing, and she'd killed him. Or had him killed. The resolution to her problem. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't make a sound. Years of living with Constance had taught me how to cry silently. I don't know how long I sat there, grief and rage warring in my chest. But eventually survival instinct kicked in. I had to finish and get out before Constance returned. I photographed every page of the coded logbooks, my hands steadier now, fueled by cold determination. Then I carefully returned everything to exactly how I'd found it, locked the drawer, and climbed back up through the ventilation shaft. By the time Constance's truck pulled up 2 hours later, I was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for dinner, my face carefully blank. Did you stay out of trouble while I was gone? She asked, setting down grocery bags. Yes, Mom, I said softly, keeping my eyes down, but inside everything had changed. I knew the truth now, and somehow, someway, I was going to make sure my father got justice. I just had to survive long enough to make it happen. The camera with its precious evidence stayed hidden behind the loose stone in my bedroom wall. Every night, I lay awake, planning and discarding ideas for what to do next. I couldn't go to the police. Constance was respected in town, and I was the troubled girl no one would believe. I couldn't run away. I had no money, no car, nowhere to go. And if I tried and failed, Constance would know I'd discovered her secret. I'd end up like my father. The answer came on a gray December morning when I was allowed to walk to the post office. Constance watched from the truck as always, but as I stepped outside with a package she'd given me to mail, I saw Jack Morrison's fishing boat pulling into the harbor. The Emma Grace. Pier 7. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate. I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, and Jack Morrison had offered it. But how could I reach him without Constance seeing? I mailed the package and walked back to the truck, my mind racing. As I climbed in, I said carefully, "I'm not feeling well. My stomach hurts." Constance glanced at me with irritation. "You're always complaining about something. I'm sorry. Maybe I just need to lie down for a bit when we get home." She sighed but said nothing more. Back at the lighthouse, she dismissed me to my room with a warning to stop being dramatic. I lay on my bed, listening to her move around downstairs. After an hour, I heard her climb the tower stairs to check the beacon, as she did every afternoon. This was my chance. I grabbed a piece of paper and wrote quickly, "Mr. Morrison, I need help. My stepmother is involved in something illegal and dangerous. I have proof, but I don't know who to trust. I think she killed my father. Please, if you can help me, leave a note in the old lobster trap by the North Rocks tomorrow at dawn. I can get there when she's checking the morning beacon. If this is too dangerous, I understand. But I have nowhere else to turn." Sarah Coleman. I folded the note and stuffed it in my jacket pocket, then crept downstairs. My heart hammered as I slipped out the side door, the one that faced away from the tower. I ran down the path to the rocky beach, my feet flying over stones I'd known since childhood. The North Rocks were a 10-minute run. There, wedged between two boulders, was an old lobster trap that had washed up years ago. Father and I used to leave notes for each other there sometimes, a game we played. I'd forgotten about it until now. I shoved my note deep inside the trap, weighting it down with a rock so it wouldn't blow away. Then I ran back, my lungs burning, and slipped inside just as I heard Constance's footsteps coming down from the tower. I made it to my room and threw myself on the bed, breathing hard, praying she hadn't seen me. That night at dinner, she watched me with those cold gray eyes. "You look flushed. Are you sure you're not coming down with something?" "Just a headache," I said, pushing food around my plate. "I'll be fine." She studied me for a long moment, then returned to her meal. But I felt her suspicion like ice water down my spine. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Constance would check the beacon at sunrise, as always. It was her routine, the one predictable thing about her schedule. I waited in my room, barely breathing, until I heard her climbing the tower stairs. Then I moved. I flew down the path to the North Rocks, my feet barely touching the ground. The sky was lightening in the east, turning the ocean from black to gray. I reached the lobster trap and thrust my hand inside, feeling desperately. My note was gone. In its place was a different piece of paper. I grabbed it and ran back, not stopping to read it until I was safely in my room with the door closed. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "Sarah, I believe you. My daughter Emma's home from college for winter break. She's studying criminal justice. We want to help, but we need to be smart about this. Tonight at 10 p.m., Emma will walk the coastal path past your lighthouse. If you can safely signal from your window, turn your light on and off twice, she'll know you received this. We'll figure out a way to meet. Be careful. Your father was a good man, and we won't let what happened to him happen to you." Jack. I read the note 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Someone believed me. Someone was going to help. That night, I waited until Constance went to her room at 9:30. I heard her door close and the lock turn. She always locked herself in at night, claiming it was for security, but I knew it was really to make sure I couldn't reach her if I needed something. At exactly 10 p.m., I stood by my window and watched the coastal path. A few minutes later, I saw a figure walking, bundled in a dark jacket, a young woman with long hair visible beneath her winter hat. Emma Morrison. I flicked my light switch twice quickly. Off, on, off, on. Below, the figure paused and looked up at my window. Even from this distance, I could see her raise her hand in a small wave. Then she continued walking, disappearing around the bend. Contact established. The next morning, I found another note in the lobster trap. This one was in different handwriting, rounder, more feminine. "Sarah, I'm Emma. My dad told me everything. I believe you, and I want to help. I need to see your evidence to know how to proceed. Can you meet me at the old boathouse on the South Beach tomorrow at 2 p.m.? It's abandoned, and you can see anyone approaching from far away. If you can't make it safely, don't risk it. We'll find another way. Stay strong." Emma. I looked back toward the lighthouse, gleaming white in the morning sun. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., Constance had a meeting with the harbor master. Something she'd mentioned at breakfast, complaining about bureaucratic paperwork. She'd be gone for at least an hour, maybe 2. It was risky, but it might be my only chance. I wrote one word on the bottom of Emma's note, "Yes," and left it in the trap. Tomorrow I would take the first real step toward freedom, or toward disaster. Either way, there was no turning back now. The old boathouse sat at the edge of the South Beach, its gray wood weathered by decades of salt and storm. Father and I used to explore it when I was younger, before Constance. It had been abandoned for years, its doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges, but it was solid enough and, more importantly, isolated. I waited until Constance's truck disappeared down the coastal road toward town, then I grabbed my mother's camera from its hiding place and ran. The December wind cut through my thin jacket, but I barely felt it. Fear and hope warred in my chest with every step. Emma was already there when I arrived, standing just inside the boathouse doorway. She was 19, tall and athletic, with her father's kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. When she saw me, her expression softened with concern. "Sarah," she said gently, "thank you for trusting us." I was breathing hard from running, and for a moment I couldn't speak. This was the first time in 3 years I'd had a real conversation with someone my own age. The first time someone had looked at me like I was a person, not a problem. "Thank you for believing me," I finally managed. Emma gestured to an old crate, and we sat down. "My dad said you have proof that your stepmother is involved in something illegal. Can you tell me what you found?" I pulled out the camera and showed her the photos, explaining everything. The darkened beacon, the signal lights from boats, the coded logbooks, and finally the entry about my father. Emma's face grew darker as she looked through each image, her fingers swiping across the camera screen with increasing urgency. When she reached the entry about RC and the problem needs resolution, she looked up at me with fury and compassion mixed in her eyes. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Can this be enough?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Can we take this to the police? Can we stop her?" Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking. "This is good evidence, but we need to be strategic. Constance is respected in this community. She's the lighthouse keeper, a widow who took on her husband's duties. Meanwhile, she paused, choosing her words carefully. A troubled girl nobody believes," I finished bitterly. "That's what she's made people think," Emma said firmly. "But that doesn't make it true. Here's what I learned in my criminal justice classes we need to make this bulletproof. The coded logbooks are great, but they're vague enough that a good lawyer could argue they're innocent notes. We need to catch her in the act." My stomach dropped. "You mean during an actual smuggling operation?" "Yes. With these photos, we know the pattern. We know she uses the anchor symbol in the official log to mark smuggling nights." "When's the next one?" I'd memorized the pattern. "Based on the timing, probably in the next week or two. They seem to operate when there's a new moon. Less light for anyone to spot them." Emma nodded. "The new moon is in 5 days. If she follows the pattern, that's when it'll happen. We need to be ready with video evidence. My phone has a good camera. If we can record her darkening the beacon and the boats coming in, combined with your photos of the logbooks, no lawyer in the world could explain that away." "But how can I signal you when it's happening?" I asked. "She watches me constantly. And she locks her door at night." "That's the tricky part," Emma admitted. "We need you to stay safe above all else. If she suspects you know anything, you could be in real danger." I thought about the entry in the logbook. Problem needs resolution. My father had been a problem, so was I. "I have an idea," I said slowly. "My window faces south toward town. If I hang a red towel in my window, I have one that Constance doesn't know about. You could see it from the road with binoculars if you're watching at night. Red means the operation is happening. If you see it, you could come with your phone and record from the rocks north of the lighthouse. There's a good vantage point there." Emma considered this. "That could work. But Sarah, you'd be taking a huge risk if she catches you signaling." "She's already killed one person I loved," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I won't let her get away with it. My father deserves justice, and so do all the sailors whose lives she's put at risk by using that beacon for her crimes." Emma reached out and squeezed my hand. "You're brave. Braver than you know. Okay, we'll do this. For the next 5 nights, Dad and I will take turns watching your window from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. If we see the red towel, we'll get into position and record everything. Then we take it straight to the Coast Guard. They have jurisdiction over lighthouses and maritime crimes. They'll have to investigate." "And if she doesn't operate during the new moon?" I asked. "Then we wait for the next opportunity." "But Sarah, promise me something. If at any point you feel you're in immediate danger, you run. You come straight to our house. It's the blue one on Harborview Street, and we'll protect you. Your safety is more important than catching her." I nodded, though we both knew that running would mean losing the evidence, losing the chance to prove what Constance had done. Still, having a backup plan made me feel less alone. We talked for another 20 minutes, working out details before Emma checked her watch. "You should get back before she returns." I stood up, but Emma stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Sarah, when this is over, you're going to have a whole life ahead of you. Don't let what she's done to you define who you become." Those words stayed with me as I ran back to the lighthouse, the camera hidden in my jacket. When Constance returned an hour later, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, just as I was supposed to be. "Did you behave yourself while I was gone?" she asked. "As always." "Yes, Mom," I said, "as always. But inside I was counting down the days until the new moon. 5 more days until I either freed myself or lost everything. That night, I slept with the red towel hidden under my pillow, and for the first time in 3 years, I dreamed of morning light instead of darkness. The new moon came on a Thursday night, and I knew from the moment Constance looked at her coded logbook at breakfast that tonight was the night. She was tense, distracted, snapping at me over small things. She checked and rechecked the beacon during the day, making sure everything was in perfect working order. At dinner, she barely touched her food. "I have maintenance to do tonight," she said, not meeting my eyes. "The backup generator needs testing. You're to stay in your room after 9 o'clock. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "I mean it, Sarah. I don't want to hear a single sound from you. If I find out you've left your room, there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air between us. I nodded meekly, playing the part I'd perfected over 3 years. The obedient broken girl. But my heart was racing. This was it. I went to my room at 8:30, making a show of being tired. Through my thin walls, I heard Constance moving around preparing. At 9:15 I heard her climb the tower stairs to the lamp room. I waited 10 minutes, then crept to my window. The red towel was ready in my hands, the one I'd kept hidden in the back of my tiny closet. I hung it in the window, draping it over the curtain rod so it would be visible from the road. Now all I could do was wait and pray that Emma or Jack saw it. The minutes crawled by like hours. At 10:30, I heard footsteps on the tower stairs. Constance coming back down. My door didn't have a lock, and I held my breath, terrified she would check on me. But her footsteps passed by and continued to her own room. I heard her door close but not lock. That was unusual. She always locked her door at night. At 11:15 I heard it. The soft creak of her door opening, the whisper of her footsteps on the stairs moving up toward the lamp room again. I crept to my own door and opened it a crack, peering out into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear her moving above, and then silence. I counted to 60, then slipped out of my room and climbed halfway up the tower stairs, positioning myself at the window where I'd first witnessed the signal lights weeks ago. My hands gripped the cold stone wall as I watched there. Far out on the black water, I saw them. 3 long flashes, 2 short, 3 long, the signal. And above me, the lighthouse beacon. The powerful light that should never, ever go dark was extinguished. Complete darkness swallowed the tower. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought Constance might hear it. The darkness lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Then, suddenly, the beacon blazed back to life, sweeping its arc across the water. But the pattern had changed. Instead of the steady rotation that guided ships safely, the beam now pulsed in a specific rhythm. 3 sweeps, pause, 2 sweeps, pause, 3 sweeps. An answering signal to the boat. I stared in horrified fascination. This was worse than I'd thought. She wasn't just turning off the beacon. She was actively using it to communicate with smugglers, manipulating a safety device meant to save lives into a tool for crime. The beacon returned to its normal pattern, and I heard Constance's footsteps coming back down. I flew down the stairs as quietly as I could and dove back into my room, closing the door just as she reached the landing. I lay in my bed, fully clothed under the covers, listening to her move around. She went to her room but left her door open. I could hear that clearly. She was staying alert tonight, ready to move again. An hour passed. Then another. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard her door open again and her footsteps moving toward the stairs. But this time, they went down instead of up. She was going outside. I waited 2 minutes, then crept to my window. In the moonless night, I could barely make out the path that led down to the North Cove, but I saw the beam of a flashlight moving along it. Constance, heading to the hidden landing spot where the smugglers would come ashore. This was what Emma needed to record. I prayed she was out there, hidden in the rocks, capturing everything. I stayed at my window, watching that distant flashlight beam. 20 minutes later, I saw more lights. Several flashlights now, and the shapes of people moving boxes from the cove up toward a vehicle I couldn't quite see. The operation was quick and efficient. They'd done this many times before. Then the lights began moving back down to the cove. The boat would be leaving, taking payment and heading back out to sea. Above me, I heard footsteps in the lamp room again. Constance back to signal that the exchange was complete. I rushed to the tower stairs, positioning myself at my observation window. The beacon went dark again, stayed dark for exactly 1 minute, then came back on. Out on the water, I saw the boat's lights begin to move away, heading back out into the Atlantic. It was over, they'd done it, and if Emma had captured it all on video, we had them. I made it back to my room just before Constance's returning footsteps echoed on the stairs. I heard her pause outside my door, and my breath caught. The doorknob turned slowly. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing slow and steady, pretending to be asleep. Through my eyelashes, I saw her silhouette in the doorway, a dark shape against the darkness. She stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then she closed the door and walked away. I didn't move for another hour, didn't dare. But when I finally heard her bedroom door close and the lock turn, I allowed myself to breathe again. I'd done it. I'd survived. And if Emma had gotten the evidence we needed, by tomorrow night, this nightmare would be over. I fell asleep just before dawn, exhausted and terrified and hopeful all at once. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through my window, and the red towel was still hanging there, visible to anyone who might look. I grabbed it and shoved it back into my closet just as I heard Constance's footsteps outside my door. She knocked sharply. "Sarah, breakfast." "Now." "Coming," I called, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I opened the door to find her standing there, studying me with those cold gray eyes. "You look terrible. Didn't you sleep?" "I had bad dreams," I said, which was true enough. She watched me for another moment, then turned away. "Well, pull yourself together. We have work to do today." At breakfast, she seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. The operation had been successful. She had no idea that everything was about to come crashing down. I pushed scrambled eggs around my plate and thought about Emma and Jack, about the video they hopefully had, about the Coast Guard who would soon be coming. All I had to do was survive one more day. Just one more day, and I would finally be free. The Coast Guard arrived at 2 o'clock the next afternoon. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor when I heard the vehicles pulling up. 2 official trucks with the distinctive Coast Guard insignia on their sides. Through the window, I watched 4 officers in uniform step out, their faces serious and purposeful. Constance was in her office. I heard her door open, heard her footsteps quick on the stairs. When she came into the kitchen, her face was composed, but I saw the flicker of alarm in her eyes. "Stay here," she commanded, then went outside to meet them. I moved to the window, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. This was it. Emma had done it. She'd gotten the evidence to them. I watched Constance smile at the officers, playing the role of the dedicated lighthouse keeper. But the lead officer, a tall woman with gray hair and captain's bars on her uniform, wasn't smiling back. She said something I couldn't hear, and Constance's smile faltered. The captain held up a tablet, showing her something. Even from inside, I saw the color drain from Constance's face. The video, it had to be the video. Constance's voice rose, carrying through the closed window. "This is absurd. I don't know what you think you saw. But we have video evidence of you manipulating the lighthouse beacon to signal what appears to be a smuggling vessel," the captain said calmly. "We also have photographic evidence of coded logbooks documenting illegal maritime activities, and we have testimony from several witnesses who observed suspicious activity at this lighthouse over the past several months." "Witnesses?" Constance's voice was shrill now. "What witnesses? That meddling fisherman. He has no proof of anything. We also need to speak with Sarah Coleman," the captain continued, ignoring her outburst. "Your stepdaughter. Where is she?" Constance's eyes snapped to the window where I stood. For one terrible moment our eyes met, and I saw pure hatred in her gaze. She knew I'd betrayed her. "She's troubled," Constance said, turning back to the officers. "Mentally unstable. She makes up stories. You can't believe anything she says. We'll determine that for ourselves. Please ask her to come outside." Constance stood frozen for a moment, and I saw her calculating. Could she run? Could she talk her way out of this? But she was surrounded by Coast Guard officers, and there was nowhere to go. "Sarah," she called, her voice brittle. "Come out here." My legs felt like water, but I made them move. I walked to the door, opened it and stepped out into the cold December air. The wind whipped my hair around my face as I walked toward the group. The captain's expression softened when she saw me. "Sarah Coleman." "Yes, ma'am, I'm Captain Patricia Hayes. We need to ask you some questions. But first, I want you to know that you're safe now. Do you understand? You're safe." Those words, "you're safe," broke something inside me that had been held together by pure survival instinct for 3 years. My knees buckled, and one of the younger officers caught my arm, steadying me. "Let's get you inside and sitting down," Captain Hayes said gently. "No," I said, finding my voice. "Not in there. Not in her lighthouse," the captain nodded. "Okay, we can do this in one of our vehicles. Is that all right?" I nodded, and she led me to one of the trucks, helping me into the back seat. Another officer, a kind-looking man in his 40s, sat beside me with a notepad. Through the window, I watched 2 officers escort Constance toward the other vehicle. She turned back once, looking at me, and her expression made me shudder. But then she was in the truck, and they were driving her away. "Sarah," Captain Hayes said gently, "we need to know everything. Start from the beginning." And so I told them, everything. About the abuse, the isolation, the lies Constance had told the town about my mental state, about discovering the nighttime signals, about finding the coded logbooks, about the entry that suggested my father's death wasn't an accident. "I have photographs," I said, my voice shaking. "On my mother's camera. I hid it in my room." "We'll need to get that," the captain said. "And Sarah, we're also going to need to bring in social services. You're a minor and you can't stay here alone. Panic flared in my chest. Please, I don't want to go to some facility where. Actually, a familiar voice said, and I looked up to see Jack Morrison approaching the truck with Emma beside him. If it's all right with the authorities, Sarah can stay with us. At least temporarily until proper arrangements are made. Captain Hayes looked at them, then at me. Do you know these people, Sarah? Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face now. They helped me, they saved me. And Emma climbed into the truck and wrapped her arms around me, and I sobbed into her shoulder. 3 years of terror and loneliness and grief pouring out all at once. The investigation took weeks. Constance was arrested and charged with smuggling, tax evasion, reckless endangerment of maritime traffic, and, after they exhumed my father's body and found evidence of foul play, murder. The coded logbooks in Emma's video, combined with testimony from Jack and other townspeople who'd noticed strange activities, built an ironclad case. They found Constance's associates too. The smugglers she'd been working with. The people who'd helped her kill my father when he got too close to the truth. The whole operation was exposed, and it made headlines throughout New England. I stayed with Jack and Emma Morrison. They gave me the guest bedroom in their warm, cluttered house that smelled like coffee and old books and the sea. Emma taught me how to smile again, how to talk to people my own age. Jack told me stories about my father, keeping his memory alive with tales of their fishing trips and my father's terrible jokes and his deep love for the lighthouse. He was so proud of that beacon, Jack said one evening as we sat on his porch watching the sunset. He used to say it was like keeping a promise to every sailor on the sea. A promise that someone was watching out for them. I want to keep that promise, I said quietly. For him, Jack smiled. I think you will, Sarah, I think you will. In February, a social worker helped me apply for emancipation as a minor and for scholarships to the Massachusetts Maritime Academy. My grades from the homeschooling curriculum I'd been forced to complete were excellent. Constance had at least ensured I kept up with my education, probably to maintain appearances. In March, I testified at Constance's trial. I walked into that courtroom with Emma holding one hand and Jack holding the other, and I told the truth. All of it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time. But I didn't see hatred anymore. I just saw a small, bitter woman who destroyed lives for money and power, and I felt nothing. She had no power over me anymore. In August, I moved to Boston to start at the Maritime Academy. The Morrisons helped me move into my dorm, fussing over whether I had enough blankets and proper rain gear. Emma, who was entering her senior year at a nearby college, promised to visit every weekend. You're going to do amazing things, she said, hugging me goodbye. I know it. My first semester was challenging, catching up on social skills, learning to trust people, adjusting to freedom after years of captivity. But I loved every minute of it. I studied navigation, maritime law, lighthouse operations, and search and rescue procedures. And on a cold October morning, exactly 1 year after Jack Morrison had first spoken to me in the general store, I stood on the deck of a Coast Guard cutter and watched the sunrise paint the Atlantic gold and pink. My instructor, a grizzled veteran named Commander Walsh, stood beside me. You've got real talent, Coleman. Natural instinct for this work. What made you want to become a lighthouse keeper? I thought about my father, about the beacon he'd tended with such care. About the lighthouse that had been used to harm, and how I would spend my life using it to help. Someone I loved taught me that lighthouses are promises, I said. I want to keep that promise. For every sailor who needs light to guide them home. Commander Walsh nodded. Your father would be proud. I hope so, I said softly. The sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist, and ahead of us, on a rocky point of the Maine coast, I could see a lighthouse standing tall and white against the blue sky. Its beacon was dark now in the daylight, but come nightfall, it would shine again. A promise kept, a light in the darkness, a guide for the lost. Just as I intended to be. The past would always be part of me. The pain, the fear, the years stolen by cruelty. But they didn't define me. I'd taken that darkness and transformed it into purpose, into strength, into a determination to protect others the way I wished I'd been protected. I was Sarah Coleman, daughter of Robert Coleman, survivor, and soon to be lighthouse keeper. And my light would never go out. 5 years later, I stood in the lamp room of a lighthouse on the coast of Maine. Not the same one where I'd been imprisoned, but a different one, 40 miles north. This beacon was mine now, officially assigned by the Coast Guard after I'd completed my training and worked my way up through various stations. It was a small lighthouse, not as grand as some, but it was honest work. Real work. Every night, I climbed these stairs and tended the beacon that guided fishing boats and cargo ships safely through the rocky channels. I'd kept my promise to my father. On my desk was a framed photograph. Jack and Emma Morrison, taken at Emma's law school graduation. She was specializing in criminal justice and victims' rights now, helping others the way she'd helped me. Jack had retired from fishing but still visited regularly, bringing fresh lobster and stories that made me laugh. Next to that photo was another one, my father, young and smiling, standing in front of his lighthouse with the sea behind him. I talked to him sometimes, especially on difficult nights. Told him about my work, about the ships I'd guided safely home, about the life I'd built from the ashes of the one Constance had tried to destroy. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soon it would be time to light the beacon, to send that promise out across the dark water. I was a lighthouse keeper, like my father before me. But unlike Constance, I used my light to save lives, not destroy them. And every night, as that beam swept across the sea, I knew that somewhere, someone was sailing safely home because of it. That was enough. That was everything.